10th special meeting for Planning Commission to order. If I could have a roll call, please.
Vice Chairman Charlie Whitmore.
Here.
Commissioner Kathleen Duncan.
Here.
Commissioner Rich Delcor.
Here.
Commissioner Jim Flynn.
Here.
Commissioner Lydia DePaul.
Here.
Chairman Amanda Jackson Denmark. Commissioner Jason Stewart.
Okay, and just for the record, Commissioner Denmark is running a little bit late. She should be here, and I'll hand off the gavel to her when she gets here. Notice regarding adjournment. The Planning Commission will not hear any new items after 9:30 p.m. unless authorized by a majority vote of commission members present. Items which have not been heard before 9:30 may be continued to the next regular meeting or a special meeting date as determined by the commission members. Notice regarding public comments. Every member of the public who is recognized to speak shall address the chairman in speaking and avoid disrespecting commission, staff, or other members of the meeting. State your name and address when speaking for the record, and comments are officially limited to 3 minutes, although we have been making exceptions during these workshops. Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, agenda is adopted. Do we have public comments, general comments first, or do we want to just?
We have no comments.
Okay. Okay, so no public comments for items not on the agenda. Seeing as there's no old business or new business, well, under new business, we will go to the discussion, the workshop to discuss economics and priority investment elements for Blueprint Bluffton, and update long-range comprehensive plan for the town of Bluffton. Charlotte Moore, principal planner. And Charlotte?
Thank you. I really don't have much to add. I do want to let you know that we are moving the vote or the recommendation to council to the September Planning Commission meeting. So there will be time for you to look at the draft. And we could talk about that tonight with Kyle, but there will be time to review that before you make a vote or take a vote on it in September.
We confirmed with the town manager to make sure, obviously after discussions with Kyle, making sure that we can get all that information, get that, final draft or the 4.0, and then allow everyone to have an opportunity to review. Can you hear me now?
Oh, it's red.
Yeah.
Oh,
You can still hear me talking.
I was worried about him. I saw it being red.
Yeah.
He has the
Plus-
special mic.
The microphones, all the microphones up here pick up all of our voices,
Gotcha.
so you can't whisper without someone hearing it.
Not creepy at all.
Not at all. The intent is to have, Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we said the 7th is to have that final plan out, and that way it's out in the public for last kind of final review based off of all the comments that you guys have provided. Gives us 3 weeks prior to the meeting. We're gonna try to, I know you probably want it in chunks. We're gonna, if we can get the chunks, we'll get them out to you individually. But then the ultimate goal is on the 7th, having that final full plan together.
For final comments and then revision before council.
Yeah.
So the intent is, if I'm hearing you right, we will get it. I didn't hear, actually. I'm sorry. How far before this, we'll get it by the 7th, and we may see pieces before the 7th.
Correct. Yes, if we can get some sections of it beforehand, but the goal is to have the full document by the 7th, and then that way, 3 weeks, that's a full 3 weeks prior to the planning commission meeting.
So public will be able to get that comment on it, we'll be able to get that comment on that, and then during that meeting, we can fine tune it and hopefully have it in a position to pass off to.
Yeah, and if there's any.
To council.
Yes. And if there's anything that, there's, glaring issues that, we can move it forward knowing that they'll be addressed, then we can do that.
Okay, I think in conversations individually with a couple of commissioners, I think that That's a good thing. I think a few of us were concerned that it even though it has been slowed down, that maybe we needed a little more time, and
Yeah.
you've already hit that, so that's
Yep.
great.
Yep.
Well, that question, Mr. Kevin, will that be shared with all of these other groups that had an interest, like the watershed? They'll be getting this on the 7th also?
We'll get it out to the public. We'll get it out there. And then, of course, all the groups that we've been working with, you know, they'll get it as we get it too.
Okay, I guess on to tonight's agenda. Charlotte, did you have anything else to add, or do we want to pass it to Kyle? Kyle, it's all you.
All right. You guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. Really appreciated this opportunity to work through the plan with you all over these 5 sessions. This is 5 of 5. I'm going to pull up the agenda here for the discussion, and also talk just through a little bit of where we've gone, where we intend to go. I think Kevin very accurately reflected the calendar that is my understanding for moving on from here. I've really appreciated thoughtful comments throughout each of the 8 other topics that we've worked through here over the 4 previous sessions. We're very close on several of those, of iterating those into that. I think it's now this 4.0 of version, and that would incorporate your comments, whether they're substantial, whether they're work that we need to do with staff to understand how to interpret, but we're getting very close. So I've really appreciated that, and as Kevin points out, the 7th, and then with the idea of the 28th, having that hearing with you all. We've got 2 topics on our list this evening, our 2 final topics in the wheel. You'll remember from way back when we first opened up the plan for the first time. One is a very interesting one, I think, within the context of a comprehensive plan. We're going to talk about economic development tonight, and dive into some of one of the findings from the work that we've done, but also this the kind of the point of view, meaning what do we do with what we know, and how do we act on what we know. The final topic tonight is a bit of an outlier just in terms of its arrangement and what it covers. The priority investments chapter, as the state lays out, is a real summation of the work and recommendations that are included throughout those 9 topical chapters, with also references to a bit of the how. And I'll get into that a little bit later when we get into that chapter, but thinking about implementation, thinking about budgeting, the cycle with which those things occur, and as Kevin pointed out during the previous meeting, this idea of ongoing planning, strategic planning, work department level planning. How do you institutionalize this work going forward and continue to interpret those policies throughout your decade of implementation? So those are our 2 topics for this evening. You'll remember that within each of our chapters, and for the benefit of those of you that may be tuning in or are new to our chapter run-throughs, we've got 3 chunks of comments that we'd like to speak through in our discussion. Of course, some open conversation as well would be tremendous in each of these topics. But I want to start with some substantial comments. These are areas where we've picked up on some notes, commissioners, through your commenting in the draft, and areas where we think there's some major pivoting we want to do, additional research, some connections to extra outside chapters, or in some cases actually some additional actions that you think may be necessary to add into the work. We have the subjective items. You remember those are things we want to work with staff to find the right voice or angle of attack in the plan. And last, want to make sure that we highlight our simple additions or comments, not for the sense that they're simple like grammatical or spelling, but simple in the sense that it's clear from your comment what the action is that you'd like to see us take, and it wasn't just you, maybe several folks shared that idea. So economic development, I'm just going to quickly jump into this and lay out a couple of the resonant items that I saw in the work. This chapter is always bit of a interesting one, I think, within the comp plan context, just in terms of the purview of, what can the town do? What can we work to influence? What do we actually have some control over within this section? You're unique in having a lot of connected and pretty effective bodies working sort of in a quasi-government or outside of government form on your behalf in this particular chapter. And you're also in a situation, as you well know, where pardon the pun, but the tide is rising here economically, right? So where we talk about tourism, commercial activity writ large, even some of the nascent industrial activity, it's more in the region as opposed to inside your bounds. Very strong economic performance, especially in the last half decade. And then one of the things that brings up an issue I think that we talk about a little bit in this chapter, but I think we can do a better job of, is the idea of workforce. We've all been through and well understand the disruptions the last couple of years in that particular area. And it's one of the notes that I picked up on in this section where I think we could do a better job. But let me quickly go through these 4 big items that I saw, and then would love to have some conversation with you all on this topic and some ways we could strengthen this chapter even further. So item A in this, in reading through what you placed on the page, this idea of strengthening connection between economic competitive performance and other aspects of the plan. One of the comments I thought was particularly pertinent in here was, how does this affect other things that the town is trying to do, right? So I think as we think about investments into the community, whether that's in new business starts, whether that's in jobs, what does that mean for what you're able to do as a town in other areas? So this idea of fiscal performance or revenue sourcing streams that feed into that larger river, I think we can do a better job of tying a connection between A and B, meaning this is why we pursue these efforts, because it gives this back, not just to the town in a fiscal sense, but also to the town in terms of quality of life and quality of opportunity as well. Additionally, another area I think we're a little weak on in this chapter, and we can do a much better job of, is strengthening this kind of inventory or connection, or indeed the role of small and local business in your community. So much of the character, the authenticity of Bluffton is really sourced from your portfolio of entrepreneurs, small businesses, whether they're in retail, restaurateurs, what have you. We can do a better job in this chapter of bolstering that analysis and talking about why that growth is important to the overall trajectory, of the community. And I think there's some qualitative components to that. And there's certainly some quantitative components to that, that we would want to bring into this as well. Additionally, I think we want to talk a little bit about the unique nature of the Bluffton economy, in this case, maybe versus the regional system. So areas where you guys have likely heard this term of location quotient, right? How do you outperform, or where are you underperforming the regional system? And what's your point of view on that? Just because you're underperforming in an area where you could make up ground in that sector, let's talk about warehousing, right? Or transportation. That might not be an area that fits from a character point of view for your community. But I think what we want to do in this chapter within the next iteration here is present some more information about kind of regionally what's going on around you. We talk about port expansion. We talk about obviously the booming and continuing to boom, and will always boom tourism sector that we deal with, but also the growing consumer retail and what that means in and around the Low Country. So we want to describe a little bit about what's going on there, and point of view, I think, from residents and from you all and from other stakeholders. Where are the areas where we want to target? I think that's a key thing, and one of the comments that came up from one of your selection comments. And the last thing I think that ties into item D here is sector opportunities, meaning just because you've got a deficit in something where you could attack doesn't mean you want to. And I think what we want to ID, and this may be something that could be improved in some of the action writing later on in this, which again, actions in this chapter really are presenting guiding light as opposed to getting very, very tactical, just in terms of what you're able to control, as a community, or what you really want to control. I think that's another component of this. But item D talking about sector opportunities, and this, again, I use the term synchronicity. What do you want to really get out of the energy that's out there in the system right now? And how can that start to enhance or address some of the opportunities that the residents see as well? So I'm going to stop there. And in any reflection on these points, or kind of in the broader, concept here of the economics chapter.
Who wants to start us out?
I know, I'm just still trying to take it all in.
Well, I don't, and. anyone
So
wanna start?
I appreciate the fact that, Kyle, you've picked up on the regional piece of it and to look at some of the other opportunities that are growing, like the port and other things, because while we're not going to be storing containers anywhere nearby, we could provide, maybe there's logistics or financial support that would work into that. So looking at those regional opportunities that you've mentioned make a lot of sense to me.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I think the key point we'd want to make in this, and we'd always want to make, is that, you have the luxury of preference in this too, right? I think in prioritization, and, sometimes it's hard to predict, especially in an industry like that, what are the secondary or even tertiary impacts of that level of investment? Who's going to want to cluster, in proximity to that sort of infrastructure? And, we can guess on a lot of that, but you're in a strange position. I think it's kind of vanguard right now, especially in that sector, what that's going to look like. And I mean the physical side of it, but also the secondary and secondary effects of it over the 10-year period. And I think the best thing you can do at this moment is to commit time, resources, or trust others to really be studying this for you, even on a day-to-day basis.
Agree, and I think the other thing we can do, which I think we are doing, is make sure we are putting a priority on affordable workforce housing, because at the end of the day, we're going to be competing with Hardyville and Ridgeland and all those other places to house some of these workers. So the more that we can do in that area, it's only going to help us.
Sure.
Can I chime in with that part there? So you talk about the affordable housing. So, a couple of things. One is that the town of Bluffton is moving forward with workforce affordable housing, and we're in the process of getting a news release out, but we've signed our contract, so we're starting our phase one for the 1095 May River Road site, which has anywhere between 12 and 14 units. But on top of that, the town is part of the Regional Housing Trust Fund, so we're putting that together as well. So I might have mentioned this before, but it's a collective bargaining of monies that can then entice developers to develop workforce affordable housing. So there's that component there. So it's been working on. So I think it's good to reference that in the comprehensive plan. But again, like I said before, the comp plan doesn't accomplish all the goals, but it just kind of gives us the roadway of how we're going to get there. So
Great.
Well, I think what Rich, you were saying, and what Kevin, you were just saying, Kyle, if I could, it was one of the notes that I had to bring up tonight, is we need, and I think we're going there, but I think it just needs to be said, is we need a theme of the fact that we want to, as part of our comprehensive plan, work with the appropriate partners and have that thread throughout the document, whether it's housing with what Kevin was just saying, whether it's transportation because we don't own most of the roads, whether it's schools, whatever it is, we need that theme. That's a major theme I'm hearing come out of this document, and it's a major theme that was in the 2007 document. And if I could add, just for context, because I was involved in the last major overhaul in 2007, a couple of things in this section that we addressed at the time that I think are still relevant, but maybe they're not, and this is part of the discussion. One of the conversations was Old Town to us was the small village, the ideal of not having Not that you could stop it from happening, but not having chain stores in Old Town. It was the local owned. That was where we put a lot of eggs in that basket of, we want, Susie and Ralph to open up a little convenience store type of thing, not necessarily Buc-ee's coming into town. But that was one of them. Another one was we talked about, due to the environment that we have with all the saltwater marshland, there are certain industries that I know, Kyle, you talked about we want to be positive, here are the things we want, but there are also, we can identify, there are certain things that we don't want. I remember specifically talking about, and it's actually relevant in today's world, computer chip manufacturing. There's money out there to be had to build these computer chip plants. Well, computer chip plants discharge about 1 million gallons of water, I believe it's per month. And you can't discharge that much fresh water. It may have been per day, but it's a lot of water in a little bit of time, and you can't do that here or you'll ruin the waterways. So there's certain industries that, even more so than just ones that have to adhere to EPA guidelines, that might be something to define in the document is we want to be sensitive to the environment with the industries that we have, and there's certain manufacturing. I mean, computer chip plant, for example, would be great west of 95, but not in Bluffton or in Beaufort County. And then along that theme of supporting each other, the port expansion, I think is a good one to point out because that's coming. It may not be in 10 years, probably won't, but it's coming. So those were some of the thoughts from the previous one that I think carry over well into this one.
Yeah. Commissioner, a couple things there. Central Ohio, where I'm based here, we've been working on the Intel project here, and just in terms of the drop from space economic development project, obviously it's massive. But what we've learned through that, and just riffing on your point around the computer chip as an example, when we start to define what we don't want, there's also the idea that again, a regional system here. It might be that, as a region, that might not be something that fits in the region, right? And I think what you're bringing up earlier, and I'm glad you see this in the theme throughout the plan, because it's something we really heard from our committee and from the public is, while there may be things that we don't control, I think it's that line from Hamilton, right? You at least want to be in the room where it happened, right? You want to be part of the conversation as these big decisions that will affect you, may be made. So this chapter is a pretty clear example of one of those. Not to say that there aren't things that you directly can control in this, but I think for the most part, what you bring up is right.
Other thoughts?
It's going to be a really quick chapter.
One of the things one of my takeaways from the economic development chapter was this idea of much of our foundation for economy here it's real estate, it's tourism, and it's retail. So the economic section, as far as I can tell, it's not that it doesn't say that we need to diversify the economy. It's the extent to which we push that and cast a vision for what that really means for Bluffton. Because right now, like I said, we're strongly identified by that tourism aspect. But what do we want to be identified? Maybe we do want it to be the tourism. Maybe we want it to be ecotourism primarily. Maybe we want it to be a tech place. But to me, it's a bit of a weakness that we're not pushing that vision for our economy a little stronger.
Well, it's funny you say that because you brought to mind one of the conversations we had. We were very concerned that it was predominantly tourism-based back then, and that we would just end up being more so. And there's been and there needs to continue to be one, but a concerted effort. So bringing CareCore to the area and one of the things we talked about in that last one was focusing on medical fields, whether it was hospitals, whether it was something like CareCore, insurance related, We also talked about potentially the higher education, the schools. And so we've seen TCL and USCB. They're not in the town lines, but now we have a culinary school in the town lines. So those are things that, and I apologize, I just haven't been able to get into this one in depth like some of the others, but they may already be mentioned in there. But I love the ecotourism aspect of it too. That's a very that can be a very prosperous industry, and we have the natural resources that people would want to see. So I don't know if that's mentioned in there or not, but
It's brief.
It is, Commissioner, and I think it's an area where, we were excited on your behalf too. And I think there's a lot of overlaps from our discussion around natural resources, around resiliency, even around land use. In tapping into that, what is kind of a nascent, side of this tourism, question. And I would say that with tourism, what's really interesting is that's not a monolithic industry either, right? There's segments to that. There's ways in which there's different angles of attack, I guess, for that piece. You're different than Hilton Head, right? Your value proposition is different than the island. It's different than Savannah. And I think what you brought up with the small business in the heart of Old Town and kind of that authenticity, if it's not getting across in the chapter, we need to make sure that it does. That's a key value proposition for you in terms of folks that are visiting, either for an evening or for a day, whatever it might be. There's opportunities to diversify even within that sector. I think on the other side, when it comes to this broader sense of diversification, one, I think you should understand that you're right, Commissioner. You have done well actually since the previous plan to address that. There's room to move. I think it gets back to this idea of being discerning within the growth. Like, what are the types of jobs that can contribute here in all ways, meaning not just to the fiscal bottom line, but also to aesthetics, quality of place, lifestyle amenity, whatever it may be. There's good partners that can join you here and help you accomplish that.
I think one of the framing questions we had, and again, some of the stuff is just coming back to mind because we're going through the same thing here. In 07, I still do, but in 07 I had 5 children. I still do. They were between 9 and 15 years old, and they were all in Bluffton schools. And the question that we asked, and I frame it to show you that, I literally was living this, is, will my kids have a job locally if they want to stay locally? And now we're, 15 years later, and none of my kids live locally. And of the 5 kids, I can only think of one that would be able to find a job here in his field. So that's one. 15 years ago, it was probably 0, but there's still, the health industry is good, the ecotourism, the higher education. What else is there? What else is there that we can do here? We can't build a Hyundai plant.
No, but we could, again, I don't know how you got CareCore here, but however that was done was brilliant. I mean, could you do that for other financial services companies, or like I said, logistics companies that could be of service in the broader region? So however they did that, and whoever did that, great work. And maybe, and I was going to ask the question because I like some of these action plans. I just like support the implementation of economic development strategic plan. Is there a group that does that, or is it the staff has to do that? I don't know, how do those get? How does it?
One more time?
It's element number E 2.2. Support the implementation of economic development strategic plan.
While you're looking at that, Kevin, there is an economic development agency.
Well, you have both the Don Ryan Center, and then you also have the Beaufort County Economic Development Corporation. So that they work both in Bluffton with Don Ryan Center, with the town,
Across the whole country.
in the county, and then the Southern Alliance group.
Jasper and
Yeah, so
That's how that gets done.
yeah,
Okay.
so there, on the larger spectrum, there are economic development groups that are constantly working for us, for Beaufort County. So that's the other thing you have to think about. Like, if an industry that comes in, just because it's not necessarily in our corporate limits doesn't mean that we're not benefiting from it. So
It's in the county.
that's where that regional approach is beneficial to have.
Well, and to speak to something you said a minute ago, Rich, and without getting into all the minutia, which I don't know most of it anyways, the property that CareCore sits on, or now EvaCore, that whole Buckwalter Center is a Beaufort County Economic Development Zone, and I may be using the wrong wording, but there are tax breaks for companies that relocate there, and if they make a certain amount of jobs and so on. And I think, Kyle, again, I apologize if it's not in here. I think we should make sure that we work with the entities to create economic development zones wherever we can to help draw companies in those. Financial is a great one. Financial industries, medical, and so on, desirable industries. I don't.
Well,
Go ahead.
Commissioner, if you look at your breakdown, in terms of industry, that's 10% of your businesses, right? It's about 7% of your overall, in-town workforce. I think some of these percentages can be a little deceiving, but you also have a significant growth within the health services sector, especially over that 10-year period now, with about 14% of your employment here is, 1,800 employees or so are in that industry. Is that some onshoring that's occurred from Hilton Head? Yeah, probably, but it's also a growing field, and it's an area that reflects, I think, it's some growing recognition of this being a permanent place, right? I think economically. So yeah, if you look just, particularly at the tourism sector and things that might be multipliers out of that, there is a lot of reliance on that, but I think there's also a lot of other interesting tent poles here that we wouldn't tend to see in other communities that might, be like you, if that makes sense.
And, one of the concerns is we don't know the percentages because they need to be relooked at, but we know there's a lot of commercial that has not been developed yet, areas where this can be built. So to me, this is trying to define this is one of the most important things in this document, to try and come up with guidelines with staff that helps them for the next 10 years. Where are we going in this? I mean, I know we're limited by zoning as to, you have to allow some things you may not want to, but that type of thing. One thing that did come to mind as we were just talking is, I don't know how it plays in here, but a big part of our economy is some of the major festivals we have. And that's a part of our culture too. Arts and Seafood's coming up in a couple of months, and that's a week-long festival that brings a lot of money into the local economy.
Great.
It's interesting, Charlie, you brought up a point earlier about, and this is not related to the festivals, this is related to your comment about a chip plant potentially being built here kind of thing. And one of the things that came to my mind was the cost of our land here. So they're more likely to build west of 95 anyway, just from the nature of our property value here. So what that does is it starts you down a path of thinking in terms of viably what financially makes sense for a business to come in here, and how do we build it for and cater it to them. And I think that's a much smaller, narrow focus in terms of what that actually looks like. When we start talking about diversity of economy, and I don't know what that industry is, and it might be finance, just because it can fit in potentially smaller footprint. So I don't know how you solve this, but I do think it's again pushing that vision of what it is, and it's also really giving a strong analysis to our land.
But I think that's where, and again, this is to Kevin's point, we don't have to get down into this level, but as we think about it, any white-collar job, financial, logistics, things where it doesn't require a lot of space, it doesn't pollute, but importantly, it has good schools, good services, good restaurants, good things like that, that's where we can be a competitive advantage compared to some of let's face it, our schools are a whole heck of a lot better than Jasper County schools and some of the other schools in Beaufort County, period. that should be part of our competitive advantage as we're attracting those kinds of businesses, but it is.
Absolutely.
It's gonna be certain businesses, because you're right, the land costs are gonna prohibit something big.
And, riffing on that a little bit here, we don't hit this very hard in the plan because there's just not great data to support it. It would just be anecdotal, but we can't forget about the work from home explosion, with all this. And, demand, one for your housing. I think the, growth tied into that. Those numbers start to sneak into some of the things we measure, usually around finance, insurance, real estate, primarily because some of those jobs are jobs you can do, from a different country, let alone from a different zip code. But that's an important player in this that we need to get our arms around, and hopefully, data improves on that front. But that's as a secondary motion affecting a lot of these other areas we've discussed, and you're in the crosshairs when it comes to a destination for folks that can be anywhere.
Well, and
I know you know that.
well, that brings to thought, it's some of the idea industries too. I don't know, like, I do know Beaufort, Savannah, they go after the film industry, they go after stuff like that. But I mean, I was trying to look it up real quick. We have a major marketing agency. They're not inside the town limits, but BFG has done marketing for, I mean, none of them come to mind, but like Coca-Cola and McDonald's type people. And it's 300 people that work right here in the greater Bluffton area, and probably most of them live in Bluffton. But those, what do you call it? I guess non-product related businesses? Well, service industry, I always think, I know it is, but I always think of like hotels and restaurants and, but thought-based?
Intellectual property?
Yeah. In terms of white collar services, that's about 1,600 employees, in your community right now, about 13% of the overall, right? And you mentioned the film industry. Believe it or not, if you really look at the numbers, that's almost 400 employees that are in that field of motion picture or amusement, and that's a hard one to buy, to separate out, but. There's a lot of the regional that you also see here. It's actually it's a lot more diverse, I think, than you would first let on. Any other thoughts on this chapter? This is an easy one to talk a lot about.
Do we have any comments?
I guess my only comment,
Just do me a favor, name and address, just so,
okay,
it would make more sense.
Carmen Manning at 111 Quartercasting Circle in Bluffton. I guess the, all good ideas, all good information that you're sharing tonight. And I think especially to grab onto the port and all the kinds of services, the distribution systems, and which don't, it's not any polluting issues. It's more office and good jobs. And people may not want to live in Pooler, and but rather be in Bluffton because they have a boat, and so they want to have that lifestyle too. So I think that's all good. But in all of this, and I hate to be the downer, and I know this is a 10-year plan, right? So, and we don't have a crystal ball, but what was sobering I heard this week is that, and I always tell my kids, having grown up in the Bronx, most of the people I grew up with are still living in they're private homes, but they're still living there. We're in the top percentage of the world, right? So it's hard and we're retired, so you have a certain aspect on life. But what's sobering is 60% of people are living paycheck to paycheck, and 30% of people with over 250,000 are living paycheck to paycheck. So, that's hanging over us, and to be able to make plans difficult, right? Nobody knows, but to also consider that in we don't want to be reading in 5 years that this didn't work out and that fell through. They went bankrupt. So always keep that in mind in the decision-making process, because I think we are in for a couple of hard times
Yeah.
that hurt everybody.
The economy is a roller coaster, and unfortunately, I think you're right, but it's going that way. Thank you. Thank you. You know, it is an interesting point. We talk about this economy, and my wife works at Gulfstream. Gulfstream is in Savannah, or based out of Savannah. They have 11,000 employees. I know at least 200 that live in our neighborhood and the 3 neighborhoods next to us. So we are, I don't know where it falls in this document, but we, to a certain extent, are a suburb, commuter city, bedroom community for the greater Savannah area as well. I know people don't always want to admit that, but we are. One of our
I don't know.
commissioners works in
Yeah,
Rincon.
Commissioner, if you guys have ever seen the on the map tool or some of the IRS data that's available, but you can track the inflow, outflow, daily. Like the folks that live here, where do they work? The folks that work here, where do they live? And, it shouldn't surprise you. There's a pretty significant switch, right? And you all are commuting to various locations throughout, but it's quite clear that, yeah, Gulfstream is a significant employer for people that live here and other major employers as well. So I think that's where we get back to this idea of this being a regional system, like housing, like transportation, like others. And it's important that you're a loud voice at that big table.
Come on up.
Andrew Keel, 22 Trailroad Street. On the port thing, I was at the town council meeting last night, and Senator Davis was kind of talking about the port a little bit because of the green space, I don't know, tax act or whatever he wanted to call it, where potentially they're going to do Beaufort County's going to do a bond to buy back, I guess, real estate that's potentially going to be developed.
If the voters pass it, yes.
Right. Sorry, I guess so it's the sales tax, right, to purchase a bond. But then I started reading about the port down there, and when I was just reading miscellaneous articles, and I'm kind of curious, I guess this really doesn't add much to this discussion, but I kind of got the impression that the port was going to potentially be built, but then Georgia, because they're a partner with now, I believe, Jasper County, as opposed to whatever South Carolina's Port Authority is. It's Jasper County and Georgia, and I think I read, or the impression I got was Georgia has kind of changed their mind in terms of how much money they want to contribute. And I don't know if that's the case or not, but I'm kind of curious if you guys think the port is going to happen more likely than not.
I'll put it to you this way. I've been around since '91, and I've been around since they started talking about the port, and it was supposed to break ground in 2015. I can tell you that I would stake my life on the fact that that port is going to happen. It's a matter of when, not if. But unfortunately, I'd love to talk to you about this afterwards, because it's a fun conversation. It really is.
Well, let me add this. I was late today because I was coming back from Savannah because my wife had to go to Savannah to get a colonoscopy because apparently she couldn't get it done here. But when you come over the bridge and you look down there, they got silos all the way down Georgia's side. And I'm curious, do you think it's because they're running out of land over there? So now the only place they can build it is on South Carolina? Because it doesn't seem to me, in my life experience, that states work well together. And Georgia would prefer to have all the money go to them if they could build it on their side. But anyhow, that's it.
There was something about the port in Jasper that we could accommodate some of the bigger ships. Isn't that true?
The reason I know the port's going to get built is because it will be 8 naturally deep water berths where you don't have to go under a bridge, and both Savannah and Charleston have to go under a bridge. And yes, I mean, this could go on for hours, but just briefly, South Carolina Ports Authority supports Charleston, always has, always will, and they've been dragging their feet. Georgia was brought in as a partner. They're now dragging their feet. Jasper County had it all set 10 or 15 years ago to be built with private investment money. And that got put on the side because it had to be done by these ports authorities. So I don't know what shape it will come in, whether it's going to be private money funding it, whether it's going to be Jasper County alone, whether it's going to be with Georgia, but my personal opinion, it will happen. It's just a matter of will it happen in 5 years or 15 years? And when it does, look out, because that's going to bring a lot more people here.
Yeah.
I will say, if it's 5 years, that's even scarier for us. If it's 15 years, that at least gives us a little opportunity to get ourselves better situated for the influx.
Well, and that's why, and Kyle, just for you on this too, that's why I'm actually, look, I know there's a lot to go through here, and there's a lot, and we feel like we're hanging by the seat of our pants a lot of times, but we've got a lot of Bluffton defined. The next town over does not have a lot of that town defined, doesn't have the infrastructure that they're going to need, and so on. So I'm
Optimistic.
uncomfortably comfortable. How's that?
Yeah.
I have,
Well, it's good. I'm sorry, Commissioner. Go
no,
ahead.
you go ahead.
I was just going to quickly share something that riffs on what we were discussing here just a little bit earlier, Commissioner Wetmore. I think you shared this about location of, your workforce. So this is just quickly showing, folks that live in Bluffton, where do they work? And it's interesting to see that, the radar diagram there on the right is just showing the sheer amount of your residents that are commuting onto that island every day. But you also see highlighted that big pimple on the bottom left. That would be the airport. I'm guessing that would be, Gulfstream. So your intuition is correct. And what I like to do in a diagram like this is then just flip it, because if you go then to look at your workforce, you'll see just the catchment area for, how you all actually source your employees for those that work, within your community. And you guys zoom pretty far out. This starts to reflect some of the housing affordability and what's going on in the broader region. But it really all directions north and south, and even across into Georgia. So I find that data to be interesting. I think it speaks a little bit of some of the conversation that's gone on here so far.
Kyle, let me pause you there. Go back to that for a second. So that second one you showed was where people who work in Bluffton live. Is that right?
This is where they rest their head at night, but they work inside your circuitous border.
Okay. Do we have those maps by any chance?
Well, it's on the map.ces.census.gov. I'll look at that when I get
There we
home.
go. Hang on.
It is. This is a great tool if you're ever interested. And this uses actually tax information, so it's fairly accurate. It doesn't have anything past the COVID yet, which is unfortunate, but it will soon. But I find this interesting in your case and context, just in terms of the differences and again, where your residents are going. Also, obviously that you're all competing for workers right now, right? And I think when we look at the map like this, you just see how far folks that are working here are truly coming from. 1,200 of which, this is only one way, 1,200 of which of your employees, almost 20%, are commuting more than 50 miles to get to your community. And that's a commute so you can connect with housing questions. So I don't know what to do with this information, but it's just good information. And if we don't have this map in there now, I think I might want to include that in the next version of our work.
I think both ends of that map would be very interesting to include as part of the comprehensive plan, and it adds to the discussion of we need to work together with the other pieces in our regions.
I also think what would be interesting to look at, it's more of a curiosity thing. I suspect what you'll find if you looked at that map, if that map existed 10 to 15 years ago, we just weren't as developed in Bluffton as we are now. And we just didn't have we just didn't even have the economy to support it. But I think all of those workers were going to Hilton Head, and we stopped them. All those workers that are coming from that 50 miles away are now stopping short in Bluffton. So I think that's creating some issues for Hilton Head. I saw in the paper the other day Hilton had announced one of their affordable housing projects, and they were talking about how they wish Bluffton would, partner in this affordable housing endeavors and, support that as well. So I just say that because I think it's interesting when you've got these people that are coming from so far away, and we've captured a lot of them, I think, here. If you were able to look, are you looking up from 10 years ago? Is that a possibility?
I'm actually going back to 2002 when your job count was only 1,600 in the community. And while you do have a sort of a similar dispersal out there in the region, it's also a little more clustered. Now, it's not quite fair because you're adding almost 6,000 jobs in that period. And these are primary jobs. So folks may have a couple, but this is just their primary. 7,300 counted within the border. And you can see, again, I use that term catchment. This is really reflecting, I would say, the kind of vast housing growth that's also occurring in your neighboring communities as well. So these places aren't static, just like you're not static. But, this I think really starts to paint and underscore the regional condition that this chapter tries to highlight.
One other question I have, and I don't exactly know where I'm going with it, but it's one of those, I saw on figure 4.1, 19% blue collar workers versus 58% white collar and 23% service. One of the things, this is maybe it's a very Midwestern belief that I've been raised with, is that those blue collar jobs, the manufacturing jobs, these are your kind of your middle income folks. These are the ones that primarily support your economy, is kind of how I was raised. So when I see a number like 19% blue collar, it makes me ask the question is, are we essentially financially balanced in terms of what supports our economy here? If we're so heavily in the white collar jobs, does that make us more volatile here? Is, I guess, kind of my question.
Well, it's really interesting, and I think that's a great comment. It's easy to say, and obviously I work in the Midwest. I work a lot around the legacy cities in Michigan and Indiana and elsewhere, and even Ohio. Typically what you see is when that's inverted, meaning you've got more manufacturing jobs, that can lead to more susceptibility or some volatility. I would say as a community, though, interestingly, you're actually pretty insulated from most economic cycles. Now, obviously, when we have a national recession like we did in 2008, that's a general downturn, and that has mass effects across the board. But where tourism is a tentpole, you do tend to see a lot more bounce back and quicker bounce back that maybe you guys tracked through the COVID experience that you all went through. That's a generality, but I think it's something that maybe in the next draft, we could talk a little bit. I pointed this out in one of those points. How are you different? I want to make sure that we hit that a little harder. And I mean literally as a town, as your border, not necessarily in the region. What makes you different when we talk about that question? I think it's a good one to bring up. Any other comments on this chapter, the orange chapter? No? Okay. Shall we move on?
Yes, 4 minutes early.
Number 10, the final chapter, the final countdown. Here we are. We've made the tour. Priority investments. Let me pull back up my document. Hide this crazy map. Priority investments. If you've read the state's description of this work and you've seen some other comprehensive plans, it's sort of an odd bird, I think, within our overall flow. It's not necessarily a topical chapter, but it's more reflecting on the basket of goods that you've collected up through your work and thinking about your ability or planning to implement the work that you've identified. Obviously, in this, in one thing that Kevin was very right to point out during our last session is the idea of ongoing interpretation and tactical planning. Within having this broad stroke and guiding light document that is the comprehensive plan. One of the tools that you do that I really, really love, and I highlighted actually in this chapter, is that CIP, the Capital Improvements Project Dashboard. you're like one of like 3 places I've ever seen in the country that actually does that well and has an all live tracking, shows the type of project, where the investment's coming, the source funding, all that kind of, up to the moment dashboarding is really, really helpful. But that's what a chapter like this really starts to paint out is, how are we actually going to start to walk this forward and get this done? And, sometimes I use the idea of the virtuous cycle of community investment, right? Developing a strategy, creating a plan to act on that strategy, investing, evaluating, which is a thing that people forget to do sometimes, right? But evaluating and then taking that back to the community and iterating. So that virtuous cycle, I think, is what, from the state's point of view, is what they're looking to point out in a chapter like this and lift up. One of the things, if you read this chapter, you'll also notice is that we've got at the end of it, this inventorying again of everything that's been suggested at that recommendation level, throughout each of our 9 topical chapters. So as we think about that, we're also trying to think about who might be the principal actor, in that particular initiative. Is this a short-term, long-term, and we have definitions for those, or an ongoing activity? We've had some discussion, I think, with staff and with you all that would begin to iterate some of the descriptions we have in there. And when we talk about priority, I want to make it very, very clear that low priority, high priority, I want to change the way we actually use words within the section of that, because if it's on the list, it is a priority. I just want to be very clear about that, especially within our action development. If it's on the cutting room floor, if it didn't make the plan, that's when we talk about things that may be left off of the immediate priority list. But if it's in the plan, it means that it was important to the community, it was important to stakeholders, it was important to staff, or indeed through our chapter discussions, it may be quite important to you all. So I want to shift the terminology in that matrix to be less about low priority, high priority, more about immediate action, or in terms of enabling piece. This is a key sequential enabling action that can help us unlock even more future work and investment. Again, you remember our rhythm: substantial, subjective, simple. In terms of substantial, not a huge amount of comments in this chapter, but a couple things that I wanted to quickly point out. I think we need some qualifying language up front. One commissioner pointed this out, that tried to make a point in this chapter about, again, agency, meaning who controls what and why is that important in the work. I think that got a little misdirected in the way I phrased that. It's again, it's not just important to point out the identify actions that are complete under the umbrella's town purview, but also to point out areas where, again, I've mentioned this the last chapter, we need to be loud. Hamilton in the room where it happens, right? So I think I can make a better point, and we will make a better point of the broader coalition or collaboration that might be necessary and when necessary. And the other point, and I think this is related to item A, is the idea, the ability to expand on this network of potential partners. So as we kind of look around you, I always think about this like a solar system, and you all being the sun, and you've got these kind of orbiting partners. Some are really tight and close in, almost like we think about the Don Ryan, almost being quasi-government in a way. They're working with you, developing planning with you, in total synchronous with your action. And then there are folks out there in the Kuiper belts, beyond, almost beyond the sunlight, but that are still doing great work and still in the orbit of this community. And they might not be working under you, but they're working for you and for your residents. So as we think about the delegation for these recommendations moving out, I do want to broaden, I think, that list of actors that may be available. And Charlotte, as I sent you an email earlier today, I think this is very related to a discussion we had in the people section, where we wanted to develop out that kind of that clearinghouse statement or inventory of, again, nonprofit folks, social and human services groups that are working, and maybe not saying what we do with that list, but in a way of just collecting up all those folks that are doing great work on behalf of the town of Bluffton and its communities here. So again, a couple of key points that we're going to address in the chapter, but I'd be interested now to kind of open this up and talk about our final section of the plan.
Before other comments, I just need to say, Kyle, we are not the sun of the low country, we're the heart of the low country. So
sorry, wrong analogy, apologies. The beating heart, there we go.
Commissioners? Who wants to start?
One where I want to start is when I was looking at this priority list, and I heard you that you're kind of wanting to shift your language in terms of how you approach that. One of the things that came to mind as I was reviewing it was the nature in which we've moved towards action on projects in the town of Bluffton of late, which seems to be like we go through a year list every year and prioritize 1 and 2, which makes it higher or low priority for those projects. But I think there was a discussion in the last time that came through in terms of, there was a lot of number ones. And so there was a comment or a question to the effect of like, how's that all going to come to fruition kind of at the same time? There's so many priorities. And so one of the things that came out of that discussion was this, as I recall, from my story, my version of it, it was resource related in terms of what funding was available, the staff that could support it. And so when I look at these these goals and objectives that we have, it's almost a question to me, is it not just what priority, and maybe you're alluding to this and just referring to it in a different language, but I think of it as a resource to action funnel, is how resourced is that action that we're able to execute, and what do we need to, like this one requires a lot more, so it's going to take a longer term to get there. It's just kind of a question or point I think I'm trying to make.
Yeah, more fuel in the rocket, right? Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And there's a potential additional column, we could add to that list. And, in the context of a comp plan, it's tough because you don't get super, super tactical, so we can't quite get to the dollar cent value of this, but I think we can definitely introduce, Commissioner, the idea of order of magnitude, right? So, minimal resourcing up to very, very significant, to the level where, this is not a general fund item, right? This is an ARPA, drop from space. We've got a windfall, right? What do we do with that money? Having those priorities, I think, ready to go. I take your point.
Cal, I was going to jump in with that. So last night's town council meeting, they actually approved on second and final reading a $10 million TIF bond. And one of the main focal points is the recently acquired 37-acre parcel out of New Riverside. We're calling the Red Barn Park as of right now. So that way they could move forward with this project, because it's a dire need of park space. And instead of piecemealing it over the next 10 to 15 years of phases, that their goal is to bring this forward as quick as possible. Now, what that does is that then obviously frees up other monies for other projects. So, kind of as Kyle is saying, with the comp plan, we can't get everything accomplished in it, but it gives us the path moving forward. And then that CIP plan, which is the 5-year plan that coincides with the strat plan. And that's where all the funding comes through. So, so council has those years kind of planned out and allocating that funding. So it's there. There's components of it there. They're realizing the need for it. The fact that they're, putting a $10 million bond out there to make these improvements. So.
Just out of curiosity, you said that's a TIF district? Is it the entire town, or is it just?
Don't ask me. I don't know that question.
Okay. TIFs, I know TIFs are controlled geographically, but I mean, it could be the whole town, or it could just be a part of it.
Yeah, I don't have the answer. I mean, we can look into it and get that to you, but.
I'm sidetracking us, I apologize.
I can go. I just have a general comment on this section. Some of my previous comments had just been about, and we've already talked about it, and I know that we're in the process of getting more of an inventory of certain categories and elements. But once we have that inventory, and in the same vein of who are we influencing and what does that look like, I'm kind of hoping that we can put together some, not just who we need to influence, but what specifically are our goals to influence them in, so that way we have a very strategic platform of the goals that we're trying to achieve for the town in different categories that we have no outright control over, but making sure that not only are we in the room, but we're in the room with a specific message that we have based on the needs of the town, like to get more of a goal statement in here if possible.
Like, what are the, you're the diplomat. What are the talking points from, from the embassy? I totally understand that. I think in a number of these sections too, we could make that clear, especially where there's less control from the town. What is the community's point of view? Like, what are your broad goals? And I think within that too, what are some of the specific strategies you might support regionally versus the ones you might not, right? I mean, you guys brought up the chip factory as an example here, right? Like, it's gonna be a regional effort to land a white whale of that size, right? But, does it fit in your region? Does it fit for Bluffton? I think that makes a lot of sense.
I envision, and maybe I'm just looking at this wrong, but I envision that I hate to word it this way, but this almost checklist or list of priorities is going to change based on the conversations we've had in the other segments.
Yes, but yeah, absolutely, potentially. So I think one of the downsides of looking at this matrix in this sort of 3.0 form versus 4.0, that this is one of the hard parts I think about piecemealing the editing of this is I kind of need the whole picture from you all to be able to finalize. And this is why this chapter especially is the last thing that I would want to finalize based out of the work that I've done, because all these other conversations then start to influence how this final piece lays out. So you're absolutely right, Commissioner. There's a relationship between the other 9 and directly into this 10th.
Well, I just think back to Rich's comments in the beginning, and that was based on a comment we had from a citizen who I think is sitting in this room about the quantity of suggestions versus the quantity of input. And I almost am hesitant to go into any of the details that are here, because I feel like these details are going to change based on, again, what we've done on the other work.
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. That would be something I would ask Kyle and Kevin. Do you see substantive changes in this priority list as Charlie is suggesting?
I think it's I'm sorry to interrupt, Kevin, but I think it is probably chapter by chapter. So there are areas where we've spent a lot of time. There's a clear, obvious pivot, I think, to the original proposal versus where we want to land, with your very solid recommendations and what I've tried to present to you back in terms of what I think I'm hearing. So, Commissioner Delport, yes, I think some sections you're going to see some significant alterations to how we presented this. But I just wanted to remind you that this final chapter, especially in terms of the matrix, is really compiling the story that's going on within each of the other 9, right? So as we address the economic questions you brought up this evening, yes, there may be some edits in order, prioritization, whatever it might be, in that final list within this priorities chapter. But there's also within this chapter, I want to remind folks that upfront piece, which talks about the management and monitoring, as Kevin points out with the strat plan and with capital improvements planning that's ongoing, how do you start to institutionalize this work and regularize the planning that would activate it long term?
Should we be talking about the LATS plan in here or any of the other ones? And I'm kind of looking at Kevin for your input on that.
So, kind of a reminder for the Priority Investment Act, where it says the Priority Investment Chapter, and I'm just pulling this from the existing one, addresses the likely federal, state, local funds available for public infrastructure facilities during the next 10 years, and recommends the projects for expenditure of those funds during the next 10 years for needed public infrastructure facilities, such as water, sewer, roads, and schools. So you also have to understand that first off, we're a limited local government, so we can only do so much. And that's why we talked about the focus on the capital improvements program that we have. Those are things that we can work on. We cannot work on school funding. We cannot work on the major infrastructure of roads. Now, I think that we can discuss it, we can reference it and say that we're a part of it, we're a part of LATS. So, we provide input, on that. We try to work with the school district. However, they have their own funding. Like, we can't control what they do. So, we definitely need to shift focus, make sure we're focusing on what we can accomplish, and then reference, other agencies that, we work in conjunction with them.
Well, and I guess that's what I was asking is, I know we need to focus first and foremost on the SIP, the capital improvement projects, but I guess my question was, should we be referencing in this chapter, even as just a couple of paragraphs, that in that theme of working with other agencies, we want to work with LATS to help establish priorities that help meet the needs of Bluffton within the region, and we want to work with COG, and we want to work with, those type of things. And I don't know if that's relevant to put in this chapter or not, and that's why I was kind of going down that road.
But one of the things that I think Commissioner DePaul, I know I've said it, Commissioner Duncan has said it, the difference I think you're hearing, at least from my perspective, I understand what you're saying, Kevin. I'm not arguing. There's certain things we could control. I think you're hearing from a number of us that we want to have some more verbiage in the plan, that we're going to work harder to influence these. And I know you are doing it because you've explained some of it to us. But to capture it and say it's part of our plan is something that would be important to me. And I think other people have said the same thing. So I think that's the only shift is, yes, we control certain things. We want to be demonstrative in saying what we're trying to influence.
And
I
that
don't want
may
to
be,
speak for somebody else, but.
I agree with you. And maybe what I'm hearing is that this is not the chapter for that, because this chapter is specific to the funding that we have. But in that vein, I guess I would like to see, since these types of goals are kind of the summary at the end of each chapter, and then in detail, and then here's kind of the consolidated list. I think I would still like there to be some sort of either summary or other statement so it's easy to find in each chapter without having to read the entirety of every chapter, to kind of hit some bullet points on what we've decided the issues that we're facing are and how we want to, what our goals are, to try to work with other agencies. I just don't want them to get lost. And so that sounds like this isn't the right chapter for them, but is there another way to include that information in the body of the other chapters, and possibly at the end of those chapters that is separate from our funding priorities?
I think you're looking
If
more
I could, I think there's two things really quick, because I don't want to lose this. There's two things that I think we can definitely do. One, Commissioner, is this summarizing, again, a point of view in terms of influence, right? Goals, objectives, whatever those might be, in working with your partners. What is our point of view as a town? The other side that I think I hear Commissioner Delacour bringing up is the idea of our points of contact, or the specific agencies we can work with. That, I think this chapter may actually be a good place to start to point out, what are the groups we're going to work with? We're talking about transportation, and we want to influence conversation going on there. Who is the principal agency, actor, whatever that might be? What is the angle of attack, for the town? Where do we interact naturally? I think we can do a better job, especially in that front end of this discussion, because Kevin reads the state part of this, trying to find access to funds outside of our own general fund, right? So if that's federal, state, whatever that might be, we could do a better job in here, I think, of painting that picture of who are all the actors on stage in this, and again, what would be our point of contact or point of influence with them.
And I was
The
gonna,
LATS plan is a great example of that. It's a regular process that goes on. It's regional in nature. It's money to project conversations, right? You guys are part of that. But, going into that with a real strategy that references back to the comp plan and references back to the ongoing work you're doing in strategic planning, that's going to make your voice that much more loud, I suppose.
so I guess my follow-up comments, one, I think you're looking for almost like an executive summary.
That'd be great.
Yes, which we can't make the executive summary until we have the full document. So I get it. I totally get it, because, this is my world, and yes, I can sit there and read a 300 and some odd page document and not fall asleep, but the average person is going to look at it and be like, what does all this mean? So yes, I totally get that. I think one of the things to remember is that the difference between the current comp plan and what we're proposing is that there's the creation of SOLOCO, which is the Southern Regional Group. It's more of a think tank. It's a group that doesn't have any charter. They don't really have any power to do anything, but it's a monthly meeting with elected officials, both Beaufort and Jasper County. And they come up with these issues and they're addressing them. A great example is we call it the SOLOCO stormwater ordinance, which came about through SOLOCO, but it's on a countywide level of implementing a document that is consistent throughout the county with how you deal with stormwater. So like that group is there. It wasn't there before. So we talk about that coordinating and communication. That's one of the avenues that we use constantly to be able to bring projects forward. The Regional Housing Trust Fund that we're talking about, that we're borderline, everyone's about to sign and start that. That's through SOLOCO. So while they're not an authority, by them working together, they're working through the municipalities and the counties, and it's a collective think tank. So, we talk about that priority investment, like having that group, that coordination and communication it's great to have that.
Part of this chapter, Kevin, as you point out, I mean, it kind of gets into the whole act of governance, right? And every community has a different angle in. And I think the problem with the state down rules, as I've seen them play out in comp planning versus some other states where it's kind of more liberally interpreted, is Greenville is different than Bluffton, as Bluffton is different than Hilton Head, and you all have different ways of doing business, I guess. And I think what I'm hearing here loud and clear, I think in this is, while we may have a different angle in, it needs to be made clear what's the best way for us to have our voice be heard. So I think that can be made stronger in this chapter and quite frankly throughout. And Kevin's right about the exec summary. That's a fundamental piece of this object that will be completed as soon as we lock up version 4.0 and insert it in the plan, and also something, Kevin, that could be a pullout for you all to use for whatever means necessary.
Do you think we can get a draft executive summary as part of 4.0, or do you think, okay.
Yes, sir.
I feel a lot more comfortable with this document now that we've gone through it. Of course, that's based on us actually seeing what you do.
Yes, sir.
I do have a couple of questions related to the priority. And again, I preface this with, I understand you're going to be re-looking at the wording and how that's executed. But one of the things that is not clear to me, and this may be something that influences how you make changes, is this understanding of these priority levels. Are they by sector itself? When I'm looking at it, it's high, medium, low, in reference within itself of the culture or in transportation or economy? Or does this look at overall the whole structure of everything that's high priority regardless of sector? And so how is, the question I have is, if I'm a regular citizen looking at this, is that where does, the high priority of transportation relate to high priority of economy? Are they on the same level? Are they on different levels? Is it self-referenced or is it overall reference is one question I have. And I'm not saying you have to answer that now, but a clarification to that in this document would be, I think, useful. Again, all depends on how you restructure that. And then in terms of how, and there's that citizen component in terms of how they're looking at it. But from a staff standpoint, and what I'm gathering is they're looking at what they can actually control, and that's where they start in terms of where they start moving on action for these. And so some clarification, and perhaps I'm misunderstanding that, in which case I don't mind a clarification on that, and I invite that. But the other piece of that is, if that is assuming that's the case, and I think we've already probably covered this a number of times, making it abundantly clear which of these items are control versus influence. Because I think the word choices allude to it, but I don't know if it's bold versus not bold, underlined, starred, like, these are what we control, these are what we don't. And from real laymen, not looking into it and inferring.
Sure. I think that's actually a good add, to that matrix, and I might fiddle with the words a little bit in terms of how we make that distinction, because obviously that's a spectrum, right? I mean, there's that we want to get into, but the other question, I guess, really quickly back, Commissioner Duncan, that you bring up, do you think it's helpful to even have the column on prioritization? I mean, I'll ask that question to you all directly here. Is that open up a can of worms that we don't even need to open? I mean, it's something that we would use typically is in kind of informing that ongoing work planning. And this is what we heard from the public in terms of getting started, or sequentially, it makes sense to start here. But if it causes more problems than it solves, I don't want to have that in the document. Does that make any sense? Any strong opinions either way?
I actually think it helps, and I may be on the wrong side of this, but I think it helps visually with here's where we're going to focus first.
Sure.
Okay.
But that's just one opinion.
I mean, I think it influences what battles you're picking, for sure.
Right.
Where to
Okay.
start?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it helps.
Just better define it, though. Keyword. Better define what we mean by this term. Yeah.
And I'm going to be a little nitpicky on one word I've heard us, including me, use tonight, is when we say we want to influence other entities. Again, I'm being nitpicky, but I almost wonder if we need to find a different word, because that word to me connotes almost strong arming.
Sure.
Partner with is not necessarily the right word, but something a little bit softer I think would help. And you told us not to do punctuation and stuff, so I'm going to leave that out. Probably a good point to break to see if anybody in the gallery out here would like to speak, share some thoughts on any of this.
Well, sure, I thought, I'm not sure it really influences this, but maybe.
We'll give it a shot. We're 35 minutes away.
Andrew Keel, 22 Trail Ridge Retreat. And it kind of comes on your last comment about influence. At the town council meeting last night, Councilman Brown mentioned that he was a little surprised about the green space tax bond, whatever. Wood, sorry, didn't I say brown?
Well, wood is brown, so yeah. I get it.
Brown, sorry, wood, sorry. I don't know why I'm getting those confused.
You're thinking of Sharon Brown, who made a public comment.
Oh, okay. Anyhow, I got the impression that he was pretty surprised that this potential tax was passed. It was almost like Bluffton is out of the loop with Beaufort. And from sitting in meetings, other meetings, it seems like there's quite a bit of conflict between Beaufort County and Bluffton. And, you said influence is a strong word. Bluffton is pretty much, I don't know about Hilton Head. I really haven't, nobody's ever brings up Hilton Head. Hilton Head almost seems like it's a separate tourist area that, is not growing like we're growing anymore. It's developed out for the most part. I think Bluffton is the growing area and has almost become a city. If you look at the number, if you define a city by 50,000 residents, depending on how you figure out our population, we might be at 50,000 in a year or two. And it seems like we're the low man on the totem pole around here. I don't know if that's the case. I haven't been involved, but it seems like we need to exert more influence in all areas.
I think that's our concern up here is we do want to. When we were 700 people, we didn't really have much of a seat at the table.
Right.
Okay, and that's changed. County council districts and school districts have changed. It used to be the dividing line in this county, geographically, everyone, not any other region, is the Broad River. And there had always been 6 seats north of the Broad and 5 seats south of the Broad. That just shifted. So it's going to be interesting to see the dynamic. But to speak, and you hit on something that, I'll be nice. The county council appointed a commission to study a penny sales tax with, I believe it was 15 people on that commission. The town of Bluffton, the town of Hilton Head, town of Port Royal, and so on, all had their own appointees, and then each county council member had their own appointee. I was the appointee for the town of Bluffton. Every Tuesday night for 3 to 4 hours for 17 weeks in a row, we all got into that. And we hashed out what would be good transportation projects, what would be good green space, what would be good all this. We came up with what we all thought, it was a unanimous vote, was a great plan. We worked together as an entire county to come up with this penny sales tax plan. And the night it was presented to county council, Senator Davis, who's a friend of mine, waltzes into council and says, I've got this great green space penny sales tax idea. And all of a sudden county council went and threw out all the work of this committee that they had put together to figure out what would be best for the county as a whole. And so that's why, I believe why Councilman Wood was a little surprised, because he knew about the other, and this one just kind of came out of.
Oh, well, that makes sense.
So,
But then, Charlie, why, if that's the case, why isn't influence the right word? Since we're the municipality that's growing the fastest,
because
why
To me-
not get our share?
to me, and you know my job,
Yeah.
I'm sales negotiation
Yeah.
and so on. To me, influence tells the other side of the conversation, almost gets them on the defensive. You're coming here to influence me. Well, wait a minute, you're saying I'm not good enough? I have to, so that's my thought process. Influence may
more
be the right word, but that's just,
Advocating.
what's
Like,
that?
we need to come up with our priorities to advocate for. Does that make you feel
Advocate,
better?
that'd be perfect.
Okay.
But there has to be something, because you're right, the history has always been north of the Broad and we're south of the Broad. We always got
We're the
second share.
SOBs.
We are, and even though we're growing the fastest, so there has to be some behind the word argument to get our fair share.
Yeah.
And we're generating the most revenue now. I mean, I just looked up Beaufort County's budget is 142 million, Bluffton's 60 million.
Actually, I think Hilton had some most, but we're
Okay.
close. We're close.
Oh,
Yeah.
makes sense. But then, and to expand on it, and Kevin mentioned this earlier, you know, we're a limited services government. I think we can stop thinking that way. I mean, it's getting to the point that, you know, it seems, like I said, I haven't been around this very often, but I've sat in 2 meetings, you know, come to some of these.
Well, I'm gonna pause you there.
Okay.
And I'm gonna strongly suggest there are, and Kevin can get you this info, and I can get you this info, and some of others. There are government training classes where you learn the structure of town government, county governments in South Carolina, and what the different options are. You know, there's a strong mayor form. There's what mayor council form, which is what we are, and then there's a third form I'm just not thinking of. But it helps to understand what we can and can't do. And, you know, it's very interesting, and it's,
All right, well, I appreciate that, and I'll have to look at it, but, you know, things are changed. And I think it's almost like everything needs to become a bit more aggressive, because I just get the impression that we're not, we're too passive. And
Well-
maybe that's not the case. I don't know. I just, my impression.
I hear you, and I look forward to hopefully you going through some of this and your opinions after. I will tell you this much, my opinion, if we weren't aggressive, we would still be 1 square mile. we, and I'm saying the collective we, not me as a part of it, but we annexed all of this land because we were concerned about the control of the land and what would happen. And could it be better? Yeah. Is it better than what it probably would have been? I say yeah. But one of the things that really impresses me is the other people that are sitting up here. I mean, how long have you all been here?
I've been here the longest, at a year and a half-ish plus.
And then how long have you been in the town? I mean,
I bought my house in 2013.
yeah. And everybody else is probably,
Year and a half.
not long. How long have you been?
Well,
6 in the town. I've worked here for 8.
I'll add,
I mean, I've lived here since 2006.
I do not think that you guys are, I think you're appropriately aggressive. I think you guys ask a lot of questions. I just, at the town council meetings, have not gotten the same, I guess, interaction from the town council on certain things. And I don't know, maybe, this is just my impression.
And we're taking a little more leeway because it's a workshop, but I will tell you, that's part of what it is the fact that we have a workshop going on, and when it's a formal meeting, we have a structure we have to follow. So even though we may be sitting up here, or council may be sitting up here going, yes, we agree with what you just said, you're not going to hear that from us because we have to be impartial. We have to.
Oh, I understand.
Anyways. But, yeah. And
Okay.
Kevin can tell you, there was a point in time here, Kevin, when it was pulling teeth to get people to even apply to be on a commission. And what was that, 2 years ago?
Last week.
But anyways, we are off subject. Did we have any more comments? Did you want to share?
Like I said before, the only thing I would, whatever you have to do to publicize, like now the report's gonna be finalized and be out there, whatever extra oomph you can do. I know sometimes you don't want that, you say, oh, please, we don't want to change anything again, but people need to get more involved. They need to understand and it's not only to influence, okay? I want this in my neighborhood. It's to really understand the full depth of Bluffton, because it is so new and it's changed so much, to give them more information.
Well, I'll tell you this, and certain people on the other side here might cringe at this, but the second the final draft is released, I plan on putting a next door post on there so people can go look at it. And they cringe because the comments that sometimes come on next door, but that is what it is, So, the 7th, Kevin? Kyle? That's what we're looking at?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So I'd like to consolidate your 900 plus comments, into this next version for you all to review and really address. I think we talked about substantial, subjective, and simple. Have all those things fully lifted up. And last, of course, think about the executive summary and this closing chapter as well, kind of the breading, on this sandwich.
Commissioners, any other comments, thoughts? Val, you want to wrap it up for us?
Yeah, I can't let sandwich be my final word here with the 10 topics. Hey, guys, I just really, really want to thank you all. I mean, commissioners, members of the public, staff, for this extra time. Like I mentioned, you don't get, I wish you did, but you don't get this level of buy-in and of conversation in most communities. So to me, this shows just how much you all care about this place. And it's quite, honestly, it's very refreshing. And I hope you respect and understand and see just how committed I am and we are to delivering you a high quality and responsive, product at the end of the day. This is important. I don't take that for granted, but I want to thank you for this opportunity. And I want to mention too, if you have follow-up questions, thoughts, ideas, epiphanies that arise, out of this evening or any of these talks, feel free to email me or even to call at any point, and we'll continue to build this product together. So Charlotte, Kevin, and to all the commissioners, thank you very much.
And commissioners, I do have to tell you, in my limit, what I feel is limited time in government on commissions and boards, I have rarely seen this level of commitment. To have conversations with other commissioners that say, we need to dig deeper into this instead of just rubber stamping it is rare. And you couple that with the length of time that most of the people in this room have been here, that's even more rare. To have a care and a concern for a community that you've more or less just become a part of. I mean, I've been here 30 years and I feel like I've just become a part of this community. But I appreciate what y'all have committed to doing this, and I appreciate the feedback. And Kevin and Charlotte, I know we frustrate the hell out of you sometimes, but we appreciate you and everything you've done with it, and I think it's going to be a much better document because of the whole process. And I am glad you're all going to get to see your families again, just like we are. But I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Adjourn.
Thank you, everyone.